synopsis. This is one of our events. I'm actually going to be putting Jill Metlin's contact information. If you'd like to join or have any questions regarding the committee, I'm going to be putting it in the chat in just a few moments. This is just a follow-up from last week's series. We're in part 2, I believe, of part 3. And this is the Why Am I a Reformed Jew? And Rabbi Adras gave a phenomenal introduction last week. And I'm so excited to see what he has planned for tonight and just to gain more knowledge of why we are Reformed Jews. So that is all I have for you tonight. If Gene has anything further, he'll come on and let you know. But here is Rabbi Adras with part 2 of Why Am I a Reformed Jew?
Thank you, Sydney. I hope, can everybody hear me? Just nod their head. Okay, because we were having some technical difficulties here in New Jersey, but hopefully we'll be all cleared up. It's Jersey. No one really knows what the hell's going on. All right. Anyway, I only have one screen but just sort of show of hands, just for the people. How many of you were not here with us last week? Was anybody not on the call last week? Maxine, let me just keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. Laura, and that's about all. Okay, so most of you were here last week, so you're fully familiar with the documentary hypothesis, the concept of the Wissenschaft des Judentum. Hi, Cheryl, nice to see you. And the theory that I presented to you of preservation, adaptation, innovation, and the development of the Reform movement, post-Enlightenment Europe, beginning in Germany in the beginning of the 1800s, etc., America, etc., etc. So you're all caught up. So that, just in case you didn't remember, that's what we did. The focus of today is really beginning to look tonight at some of the institutional nitty-gritty of the Reform movement. I gave you the theological foundation last week. Where is Felice? But Felice, unmute yourself, because you had a question based upon last week, and that really was will be a nice segue into tonight. So Felice, unmute yourself at the count of 3. All right.
Did I do it?
Yeah, you did.
Thank you. Thank you. So this is fabulous. I love being part of this fabulous Reform congregation. But I did not grow up Reform. And I've been so fulfilled in so many ways. And so the one thing that gave me really a challenge to deal with last week was the idea of the definition of Reform Judaism is the most important thing is that we believe that the Torah was written by man. And I had a hard time processing that because all of my life I've thought that I believed in that all of us, every Jewish soul, was at Mount Sinai receiving the Torah. So okay. Thank you for addressing that with me, Rabbi.
So here's the answer very quickly, based upon what we did last week. Every rabbi will help preach the same sermon that we are all at Sinai, especially around Shavuot and the passages in Exodus 20, which talks about the revelation. Most of us who were raised in a non-Orthodox community understand this to be metaphorical language. You know, symbolically, we were at Sinai. My grandchildren probably think that I was physically at Sinai, but I wasn't. But symbolically, we all were. It's a custom. It's a metaphor for the linkage of all the Jewish people. Okay. Now, when we get to the platform stuff later on, which hopefully we'll get to, you'll see that the last Reform platform dealing with God really speaks to exactly what I emailed you about, Felice, that there is no defined God concept within the Reform movement. It is evolved theologically in a scientific study of Judaism. Therefore, it accepts the documentary hypothesis that we did last week, and it accepts the non-divine authorship. Are there Reformed Jews who believe that there is divine authorship or divinely inspired authorship? Tons, thousands. Are there colleagues who affirm this and believe this in their soul? Absolutely. You'll probably meet some when you interview them. So it is very much a personal, and this goes back to the concept that I talked to you about last week and the idea of autonomy. So you have the individual autonomy to really confront this. And the text that I use to teach this when I'm on the road is Exodus 3, which says when Moses is it's the burning bush story, and he's walking, he's shepherding, and the bush is burning, and a voice comes, and the voice says, Moses, I want you to go to Pharaoh and tell him to let the people go. And Moses says, are you out of your mind? I said, do you think I'm going to go to a Pharaoh and tell him a burning bush told me to go there? You're crazy. At least give me a name. What's your name? What's your name? Is it Sheldon? Is it Ramona? What is your name? And the God says, I'm playing a little bit with the translation. And God says, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, which can literally mean grammatically, if you unpack it, I'm going to be what I will be. In other words, I teach this as a challenge to each and individual Jew to confront their own concept and definition of God. There is no one. The only almost creedal, we'll meet this Saturday morning when you do Torah study with the cantor, because this Torah portion has the Shema in it. And the concept is not theological of divinity, it's the concept of unity, echadness, oneness. So, so you are in good company, Felice, of understanding that this is what I believe in, and I am a practicing Reformed Jew. So there's no boundary that you can't cross. But you struggled with it, and the struggle, to paraphrase Maimonides, is the actualization of belief. And you change. I mean, hopefully the God concept that you had when you were 12 or 13 is not what you have, at 55. So, and that'll come into play in some of the things we talk about tonight. But really, Felice opens the door to a conversation that I wanted to begin, and it's a really segue into last night. We'll do a Jewish Jeopardy. The question that I have to ask you is, what is now, as the sun is setting, what is ending in the Jewish community? Felice, can you take it, Felice? You have to unmute yourself.
Darn.
You're okay, Felice.
Thank you. Tisha B'Av. I get a lot of points for that.
You do. You got to take Yom Kippur off. Don't get excited, Rona. The Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av began last night and is ending right now at sunset. For those of you who were raised in a real Orthodox home, an observant home, you did not eat today. You fasted. You practiced self-denial. You sat on low benches because you are in mourning for the destruction of the first and second temple. You said you read the book of Lamentations, and you were also in mourning for the slew of tragedies that have impacted the Jewish community, even beyond the destruction of the first temple in 586 and the second temple in 70. Now, I am going to bet you my Phillies tickets, which at the present time are basically worthless, that the majority of the members of Ahavat Chesed did not observe Tisha B'Av. I'm not going to take a poll. The office was open. The staff was working. I had a high holiday meeting with the cantor this morning. Tisha B'Av is rarely observed within the totality of the Reform movement. There are individual congregations whose rabbi will choose to have a Tisha B'Av observance. And one of the challenges is to raise something in a contemporary world. I'll ask you, how many of you are in mourning for the destruction of the temples in Jerusalem, and by definition will pray in your prayers during Tisha B'Av for the restoration of the sacrificial cult and the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem? I will bet you that very, very few of the members of Ahavat Chesed have done that or even care about it. Yet, if you walked across the street to the Orthodox shul, most likely they've had some sort of Tisha B'Av observance. People may not even understand it. And this is one of the challenges and differences that the liberal Jewish community takes, because right now, in this resurgence of a return to ritual, which hopefully we'll get to either tonight or next week, you're seeing slowly, this is very slowly, more and more of my colleagues, younger colleagues especially, who will try to reintroduce some sort of an observance and broaden it, reinterpret it, broaden it from just the destruction of the temples to an observance of the Holocaust, the expulsion, the ha-midrash massacres, the pogroms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And really as an attempt, not fasting or sitting on the mourners' benches, but an attempt to revitalize or bring into the contemporary world what this commemoration is, which has a lot of difficulty for a lot of the contemporary American Jewish community who really doesn't pray this. And to be truthful, it comes in the middle of the summer, which is programmatically, let's be honest, is also an issue. So that being said, any questions on that before we move on? Once, twice, three times? Cool. Now, we're going to try an experiment tonight. The experiment is that I'm going to try to actually share my screen with you. The odds of this working successfully are very, very little, but we're going to try it because I'm very, very much technologically challenged. So I'm going to push my screen. Where we're going to go is the first thing I want to do tonight is walk you through the vocabulary and teach you what these institutions mean in the Reform movement. You support these institutions by your membership in the URJ, by your dues to the movement, by your free will contributions to other ancillary organizations. You do support the movement. So we're going to go with this one and share. Holy shooby-dooby-dabby. Can you all see that? I can't see you because you just, okay. Here's the Reformed Jewish alphabet. Oh my God, I don't believe this freaking worked. Oh wow, I'm taking the day off. You have no idea. This is like, and I didn't do this without my grandchild, which they usually laugh at me. Here's a beginning of the Reformed Jewish alphabet. We love initials, okay? So the URJ, which used to be the UAHC. When I joined the staff of the union in 1978, it was the UAHC. Somewhere along the lines, we changed it to URJ, Union for Reform Judaism. What is this? The Union for Reform Judaism is the congregational arm of the movement. It's headquartered at 633 3rd Avenue, 7th floor. The president of the union is Rabbi Rick Jacobs. The URJ works with about 850 to 900 congregations all over North America. It is the congregational arm. Anything that has to do with a congregational aspect of the movement runs through the URJ. It used to be, up until about 10 years ago, there used to be, the union was divided into about 13 regions, administrative districts, which covered dozens and dozens of congregations. And they had a whole series of program departments. When I joined the union, I ran a region, the Pennsylvania Council, which had 60 congregations in it, which covered parts of 5 states. And then in '97, I started my program department of Jewish Family Concerns, in which we created all the programs that really flowed into congregational life for about 18 years, dealing with what's happening in the Jewish family, everything from the caring community to bioethics to all the LGBT stuff, disabilities, mental health, the older adult stuff, which gave birth to my Jewish Sacred Aging program. All kinds of things flowed through that. That's the congregational arm. A congregation applies for membership in the movement, just like somebody would walk into your office and apply for membership to become a member of Ahavat Chesed. Congregations apply. There is they got rid, and by the way, that 10 years ago, they in a restructuring, they got rid of all the regions and all the program departments. This congregation used to be in the Southeast Council, whose regional office was in Miami. A congregation who wants to join the movement and affiliate with the movement will apply for membership. It's judged, there's a committee, it goes before the North American board, and it's voted up or it's voted down. Most of the times it's voted up. And there's a procedure. We don't have to go into the details of the procedure, but there's a procedure, okay? So the URJ is the congregational arm, okay? So the CCAR stands for the Central Conference of American Rabbis. The CCAR is about the oldest actual professional rabbinic organization still in existence in the world. It began when the Reform movement really started to organize in the mid 1800s in Cincinnati. The Central Conference of American Rabbis is also headquartered in New York on Lexington Avenue. Rabbi Hara Person just assumed the directorship last year. She used to work with me at the union. And this handles everything to do with rabbis. A lot of lay people call it our professional union. It's not a union, but it is really there to support the work of the rabbis. So in other words, and rabbis pay dues. I pay dues to be a member of the CCAR. It does a tremendous amount now, since the union got rid of the program departments, a lot of educational work. So there's a whole booklet, about that thick, of professional development classes that rabbis are asked to take and partake of. And now there's a requirement for professional growth and study that a colleague has to take certain numbers of these classes during a particular period of time. If there's an issue with the rabbi, it goes to the CCAR. If it involves the congregation, it will go to the URJ. And if it involves both the rabbi and the congregation, there's a committee made up of both organizations that will try to adjudicate a compromise, a meeting, etc. You want to stay far, far, far away from that. The CCAR is divided up into regions. The CCAR has an annual convention where it passes resolutions that deal with religious life in the United States of America and Canada from a rabbinic perspective. The URJ, as the congregational arm, meets every other year in huge conventions called biennials. I've done 20 of them in my career, and probably am done. And they now meet in large convention centers because they draw between 5,000 and 6,000 people. It's the largest synagogue convention in the history of the Jewish world that meet every other year. They pass resolutions that form the congregational platform of the Reform movement. And a lot of times the CCAR and the URJ will pass resolutions on the same subject, and those resolutions are used by rabbis and congregations to develop policy programs and deal with certain situations, but everything from politics to ritual matters to governance matters, from some nitty-gritty stuff to global stuff. Not everybody agrees with all the resolutions that are passed, because there is a whole process of committees that go through the process. Sometimes it takes a year to actually formulate a resolution. The resolutions usually come from congregations. Sometimes they come from the committees within the movement, the URJ or the CCAR. But eventually they have to be brought to the convention. So it is not unusual, because I've been there when this has happened, where you'll have 5,000 people debating a very, very important resolution on the policies of the Reform movement, both in the CCAR or the URJ, and it can get a very, very, very contentious debate. You know, when Dr. Eisendreth of blessed memory was the president of the Union in the 1960s and had the UHC pass a resolution against the Vietnam War, it almost split the UHC. When I was just starting out in the conventions at the CCAR and also the URJ, resolutions that were brought before both the body of the URJ and the CCAR dealing with expanding the boundaries of conversion, patrilineal descent, which was extremely controversial and is only still recognized within the boundaries of the United States. The Canadian reform movement does not accept it. And that was part of the debate. Patrilineal descent was a major contentious issue that came up through the committee structure and literally changed much of the fabric of the United States Jewish community. Much of that is witnessing in the membership of ha-kneset in the majority of Reform congregations. The patrilineal descent is the child of a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother is considered to be a Jew if they, and there's a qualification, if they formally affiliate, if they go through bar bat mitzvah, naming, confirmation, etc., and they formally affiliate with a congregation, thereby demonstrating their allegiance to the community. This is not halachic, as you know, and it's still a point of controversy in the contemporary American Jewish community, and in some congregations of whether somebody will accept somebody who's comes to a Reformed congregation as a patrilineal descent Jew and not halachically according to Jewish law. So this is still going on. This is not done. The Reform movement was the first to move out that, to really revolutionize that. Likewise, in all the LGBTQ stuff, going back to the 1960s, we published a big book a long time ago with all these resolutions. And as early as the late 60s, the economic and social equality issue came before the movement in convention. So, and I've been to some of these conventions where they're really, people get, and the majority wins. But it's always accepted the fact that we had our opportunity. And this is why, by the way, it's extremely important for members of congregations to send delegates to these biennial conventions and make sure your rabbi goes to, in the future, the CCAR conventions, because this is where the policy is debated. HUCJIR is my alma mater. We had no football team. That stands for the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. Now, for those of you who know about our podcast that we do on Jewish sacred aging, I just posted 2 weeks ago a podcast with the new president of HUC, Dr. Andrew Rayfeld. So he was really, really good. Especially for those of you, since you guys are going into placement, it probably would be a good idea to listen to him because he's really talking about some of the changes that he wants to bring in and what the new rabbis should look like. HUCJR has 4 campuses, which drive a lot of lay people crazy. Jerusalem, New York, where I teach, Cincinnati, where I went, which I basically try to block out, and Los Angeles. All these campuses now ordain. When I started out, only Cincinnati and New York ordained, but with the explosion of Jewish life on the West Coast, I don't know how many years ago, at least 2 decades, the Los Angeles campus started to ordain as well. The Jerusalem campus ordains rabbis for the Israeli Progressive Movement. So those are 4 campuses. They're part of your dues to the URJ. The checks that you send to the URJ as membership dues, about 45% or 45 cents out of every dollar goes to the college. And that helps support and train the next generation of rabbis, cantors, educators, and Jewish communal service workers. So all of these 4, rabbinic training, cantorial education, Jewish communal service workers, you can also, and some nonprofit work, All of these are funneled and educated through HUC. And there's all kinds of PhD programs. I taught in the rabbinic and education programs, and I still teach in the Doctor of Ministry program at HUC. The college is undergoing significant changes because they are really dedicated to try to restructure the curriculum to deal with the 21st century rabbinate, which is significantly going to be different than the 20th century rabbinate. Okay, so these are the big three: the Union, the CCAR, HUC, JIR. So if you see a letter, if you see your rabbi, me, the cantor, Michelle, Jean, you know, somebody talk about these letters, this is what the letters stand for. The RAC is not medieval. It stands for the Religious Action Center. The Religious Action Center is, to put it bluntly, the Reformed Jewish lobby in the city of Washington, D.C. It is located at 21st and Massachusetts Avenue. Its founding president, executive director was Rabbi Richard Hirsch, who is in his early 90s, is now living in a retirement community in South Florida. For 40 years, it was headed by Rabbi David Saperstein, a name that some of you may know. And it is now headed by Rabbi Jonah Pesner, who I just interviewed him for the podcast. His podcast will post next Friday. And if you are all interested in the social action aspects of the Reform movement, I would urge you to listen, because I asked him point blank about the alleged anti-Semitism with Black Lives Matter and how congregations are dealing with it, how rabbis are, how the RAC is dealing with it, the whole history of the Religious Action Center and the Reform movement, because the founder of the RAC, Kivi Kaplan, was the first president of the NAACP. And so there's a tremendous amount of linkage Jewishly, historically, from the 50s and 60s between the Reform movement and the African American community to this day. So the Religious Action Center is the political, and they don't like to call it that, but that's really what it is. It's the political lobbying center. It basically creates out of the Commission on Social Action, which is several hundred people from Reform congregations all over North America who do the same thing. They study issues and create policy, and then it's voted upon by the Commission on Social Action, which then works its way up to the biennial. They also do a tremendous amount of leadership development. There's something called the Litakain program, where teenagers are brought to Washington. They can't do it this year, to really be immersed in the social justice, the prophetic text of Judaism and how it relates to the world. And then every other year, there's something which, if you haven't been, I urge you to try to get to. They're still working on whether they're going to be able to do it in person, called the Consultation on Conscience. This started out with a small group. It's now up to 800-900 people. They come to Washington for a couple of days of workshops, intensive training, and then lobbying on behalf of the positions of the Reformed Jewish community. It's a very diverse group with all political and opinions represented. It's a very, very, very good group. I mean, very high quality individuals. And they engage in very, very meaningful debates. So this is all out of the Religious Action Center. The RAC also works in coalition with other religious organizations. So if there's a lot of interfaith work in the United States, in the Reform community, it's going to run out of the RAC. Jewish-Muslim dialogue, Christian-Jewish dialogue, in coalitions with other religious organizations for various religious, political / it is not unusual to have David Saperstein or now Jonah Pesner meeting with legislators, senators, to really try to say, this is a liberal Jewish voice, a liberal religious voice, to counteract some of the religious right, which has a very large voice on Capitol Hill. That's the reality of life in America today. And the RAC is our voice in these issues. And again, as we revitalize the Social Justice Committee for Ahavat Chesed, one of the things I'm hoping that the congregation, picks up on is to try to get some people involved in the social action, the Commission on Social Action, so you can help make policy. All these policy of the union, the biennial resolutions, the CCR resolutions, the social justice, all come from the ground up. They all come from the ground up. Where it comes from the middle level is where they'll have a committee. For example, many years ago, there was a resolution passed by the biennial in Baltimore on hospice care, comfort care, and palliative care. My group helped write that resolution, and we presented it to the union biennial. It is now policy of the reform movement in favor of hospice care, palliative care, and comfort care at the end of life. That came out of my committee, and we debated it. We sent it to the appropriate the resolutions committee. It went through their debate and then went to the floor of the biennial. So it worked its way through from a small group of people, 12, 15, 20 people, up to having a vote by several thousands of people. And that's not unusual at all. In other words, if ha-kneset wished to write a resolution to have it to be policy for the reform movement out of your social action committee or this committee, you could formulate that resolution. It would be sent to the resolutions committee of the biennial and work its way through. And it'll take time because the biennial meets only every other year. But if you haven't been to one, it's a very, very interesting experience. And it is a great place to, I cannot tell you, I am not supposed to tell you that it is a good place to meet prospective colleagues to come to your congregation. You did not hear that. But the next biennial isn't for a year and a half, maybe. They're debating right now as to even if it can happen person to person, because it is 5,000 to 6,000 people. Okay, the next one. It's another organization that I'm involved with. I've spoken there, gone a bunch of their conventions. WUPJ, otherwise known in the trade as WUPJ. What's WUPJ? Stands for the World Union for Progressive Judaism. This is an umbrella organization of all the progressive congregations all over the world. It meets also every other year between various countries. The last one was in Israel. And it has regions. We're in the North American region for the World Union. I've done 2 biennials and the Latin American region, one in Rio and one in Buenos Aires. The new president of the World Union is Rabbi Sergio Bergman I think he's from Buenos Aires. This is a very, very exciting organization that gets very little pub in America. But if you go to one of their major conventions, you will be surrounded by hundreds of Jews, progressive Jews from all over the world. You'll also understand how different the American experience is from the Australian experience. What I found in Latin America was very different. Those of you who've traveled, you know that you can sit in progressive synagogues, and progressive is the word that really is used a lot around the world as opposed to reform and conservative. So there are conservative congregations who are members of the World Union. There are Reconstructionist congregations that are members of the World Union, and Reform congregations. And Reform means different things in different countries. For example, after my 3rd year at HUC, after being undergraduate for 4 years and go straight through 3 years of HUC, a whole group of us who said we've had it ran away. Most of the guys who went to Israel to study. I wanted a congregation, so I took a Reform congregation in Ilford, Essex, which is at the end of the Central Line in London, for those of you who know London. And it's my second home. I've been back more times than I love it. I'm very much at home there. And I still see my friends and some of the kids I bar and bat mitzvah, where they're now all grown up. But I served a Reform congregation thinking it was just like my Reform congregation at home, except when I got to Southwest Essex, it was a conservative congregation, very much like an American conservative congregation, because in London, in England, the Reform movement is more conservative, and the liberal movement was much like the Reform and Reconstructionist movement in the United States. So the vocabulary changes. If you go to progressive congregation in the former Soviet Union, in Germany, in Spain, you'll go to a progressive congregation, and they're usually members of the World Union. And their system is somewhat similar to the URJ. It's divided into regions around the world. It's a challenge because instead of dealing with a country, you're dealing with the entire globe. And if you think there are disagreements within the union about geography and the way things are practiced, you can get a lot of differences around the world. But it's for those of you who have a sense of wanting to do something very, very exciting, and you want to get involved with the World Union, just let me know. I'll connect you in about 30 seconds with the executive director and the president. The president, Carol Sterling, was a lay leader in my department, and as I said, the new head of the executive director full time is Rabbi Bergman. Next, the ARJE stands for the Association of Reformed Jewish Educators. The Jewish education world is being professionalized. There's a professional degree. There's the students of mine at HUC usually get their RJ, the Reformed Jewish Educator certification. Sometimes they stay an extra year, which is a very valuable year to become a rabbi educator. It's an additional certification and qualification. When you go into placement, if you find you're interviewing somebody who has who's there as a rabbi educator and has their education, they've gone extra years to get more qualifications, which is very, very good in this day and age. They also meet in convention. They're also organized very much in a similar way. And it really is an umbrella organization of all the people who are running religious schools within the Reform movement in North America. And frankly, it does speak to other people around the world. The supplemental schools, the religious education, this is their professional organization. So Michelle should be a member of the ARJE. I think she is, because that's another way that you get cross-fertilization. The ACC is what Canterbury is a member of, the American Conference of Cantors. They're heavily engaged, as the rabbis are right now, online with various listservs and websites and webinars on how in the heck are we going to do music during the high holidays. Because every congregation is different. Not every congregation has the same ability to handle this stuff. The new thing with the ACC is about 2 years ago, there was a change at the school, at the seminary, and the cantors coming out of HUC now get ordained. This is a big, big step. It's an attempt to more or less equalize or level the playing field with rabbis and cantors. So if in the future, if you look at a cantor who's coming out of HUC or has been out of HUC now, well, let's say 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years from now, you may get a cantor who's ordained. They're not ordained as rabbi, they're ordained as a cantor. And the cantorate education for the cantorate is extremely complex, very long, 5 some years, and of great mastery. It's a very difficult curriculum. But this is the professional organization of the ACC. The WRJ, stands for the Women of Reform Judaism, otherwise known in a former life as the National Federation of Temple Sisterhoods. This is the sisterhood organization of Reform congregations around North America, and they're matched now by what used to be the National Association of Temple Brotherhoods. Their name was changed a couple of years ago to Men of Reform Judaism. So that's the men and the women's organization. And the youth organization, some of you probably know, is NIFTY, which used to be the National Federation of Temple Youth. They think now they call it the North American Federation of Temple Youth for obvious reasons. NADA is what Gene, I think, is a member of. That is the North American Association of Temple Administrators. So my son-in-law, who's an executive director at a congregation here in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, is a member of NADA, and the new president, Jack Feld.
Rabbi, you're not coming through.
There. What was the last thing that came through?
you just said about your son,
Oh yeah, NADA. So I'm working on a new microphone, Gene, and I think if my hand goes too close to it, it shuts off. It's very sensitive. Must be Jewish. And so yeah, NADA is the Association of Temple Administrators. So many of the temple administrators, and there's a certification program to go through that. They continually attempt to professionalize this. And the last one are the camps, which are really the crown jewel of the Reform movement. One of the great challenges right now, as we speak, is the fact that COVID canceled all the 12 or 13 URJ sponsored camps and many of the conservative camps, the Ramah camps. And that has really, really, really impacted Jewish youth life right now this summer. And not to the positive, to the negative. So the camps are really the crown jewel of the Reform movement. I mean, I started working at Camp Harlem in 1963. Camp Harlem is located in the Poconos. It is by far and has been judged by independent studies the finest of all the URJ camps. When I was a regional director, I ran out of my office. I technically was ahead of it, but that was impossible given the camp director, who was a very good friend of mine. But their camps, your camp is Camp Coleman. Each region, geographic area of the URJ has a camp assigned to it, where the congregations in that geographic area are supposed to send their kids, although that's fluid as kids sometimes move. The South has two not only Coleman, but Jacobs in Mississippi outside of Jackson, and Green Family Camp in Bruceville, Texas, which is a long par 5 down Interstate 35 from Waco. Not a town I would advise you to vacation in. And then there are camps spread all over the rest of the Union. Several camps on the West Coast, a camp in Illinois, Osrui, a couple of camps in Massachusetts, and Indiana. Then the Union also, about several years ago, expanded the camping program because it was so. We now have an arts camp, a technical camp, a sports camp, and they attract certain kids on, and it's all of this is done within the context of Jewish values and text and education. And to tell you the truth, if you went to the majority of the last 20 years of graduates of the Hebrew Union College as rabbis, cantors, and educators, you would find that the majority of them have come through our camping program. It has really been a huge conduit and hundreds and hundreds of Jewish professionals who have come through our camping program. So this is like the basic introduction to the vocabulary of the Reform movement and how things bubble up and how policy is directed, and each one of these different organizations, how they have their own basically platform and purview. But the big three remain the URJ, the CCAR, and the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. Okay, any questions on any of this before we get to the tough stuff? Because I can't see screens. So Gene, if there are any questions, we'll take them. Anybody? Okay.
I posted a couple questions in the chat. Are you able to view the chat, or would you like me to ask them out loud?
Screen sharing has stopped as this shared. I don't see that anything. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, gee. The 5 to Kimberly, to Oren Schaefer, Cage. Oh, Cage is not a URJ. If it still exists, Cage, which is a speak slowly, multi-denominational Jewish education. I've spoken at a couple of occasions, but the last thing I heard was Cage was out of business, and they're trying to resurrect it. What makes the camps the crown jewel? Effectiveness in promoting Jewish life for the youth? Yes. Financially lucrative? Yes. Something else? All of the above. And by the way, Oren, I can't see you, Oren. I don't know what screen you're at. Oh, you're hidden. Oh, there you are. But are you wearing a Nifty shirt? I can't hear. Oh, Sonic. Oh, same
I
thing.
did Misty, but no, that's not what the shirt is.
Oh, okay. Yes, one of the challenges right now that the union is facing because of the cancellation of all the camps, I mean, do the math. It's a significant amount of revenue. So as a result of COVID and as a result of the loss of the camp revenue, the union has laid off and furloughed 120, 130 people. My daughter, one of them, because she runs the meetings and conventions department, which means she's in charge of putting the biennials together. So this is a real, what's happening now to the movement, and the same thing in the conservative movement. It's not up. It's the same thing in all the denominational movements. The pandemic is really, really, really impacting these institutions, very much so. I can't lie to you. And anybody who reads the Jewish press or aspects of the Jewish press, it's been all over the Jewish press for the last couple of months. The 6 points, yes, Marilyn. The other 6 points I mentioned is one of the camps, and New England. I think the technology camp is up near Boston. Yes, so all these, and that's what I'm saying. When the camps, when they made the decision Elizabeth told me, I think it was it was in April, before May. I was hoping they would wait till May, but they didn't. To cancel, it was really a shock. And for a lot of these kids who they live for that summer at Harlem or Green or Coleman, and they make friends for life. And I have an 11-year-old granddaughter who is going to be her 3rd year. It really has impacted her. I mean, and a lot of her friends, that's as these kids say it, their happy place. So this is, it's a challenge, but the camps are really, we call them the crown jewel because really I used to tell Oren that I used to have small congregations in my region out in Western Pennsylvania, Northern Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, the Steubenvilles, the Wheelings, the Mennesons. They would have Uniontown. They would have a religious school maybe of 10 kids. And I would go visit these congregations and say, why are you wasting your money on a religious school that meets once a week with volunteer teachers who may be keeping one chapter ahead, and the kids are being pulled in? Take that money, send each one of these 10 kids to Harlem for 4 weeks or 8. You'll get a better return on your investment. Their Jewish identity will be strengthened in ways they could never, ever, ever be. Because for a lot of the small congregation kids, they go to Harlem, they'll go to a union camp. That's more Jewish kids than they'll ever see in their high school or their middle school. It's and to have that taken away this summer has really, really, really impacted a lot of stuff. So any other questions? So let me try and do this. Where are we? Share screen. There are 55 people? Okay. Statement. Come on, share. Come on, baby. That's not up. All right. Well, I did something wrong. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Okay. I'm going to try and do this again.
Yes, you're showing the statement of principles for Reform Judaism.
Oh, that's up there? Okay, great. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, so I want to conclude tonight. Next week, we're going to take a look at some of the governance and some of the resolutions and walk you through how some of these resolutions, some of them somewhat controversial, somewhat non-controversial, and try to walk you through some of the how these decisions were made, keeping in mind what we just went through, so you'll have a background of what's going on. Somebody please mute. Okay, guys, please mute. I'm getting a lot of feedback. Thank you. Okay, here you have in front of you, hopefully you can see this. This is the last statement of principles of Reform Judaism, adopted in Pittsburgh for the convention of the Central Conference of American Rabbis. It is the rabbinic organization that does the theological, faith-based statements of principles, not the URJ, the congregational arm, but the statement of what we call platforms. This is the last platform that was voted on in convention. I was at this convention a long time ago now. It seems like only yesterday. The preamble takes you through the various, the first one, the Columbus platform. If you read the Columbus platform, you'd be reading classical German Reform Jewish philosophy and theology in the late 19th century. No mention of Israel. Felice, much more around the way you were talking about your belief in the Godhead, language that we don't really use anymore. If you go to the Columbus platform in the 30s, all of a sudden you see a shift because of what was happening in Europe. And the platform reflected the rise of Nazi Germany. It reflected the rise in anti-Semitism. It reflected an opening for maybe we do need to talk about a Jewish homeland. It was absolutely, you could trace what was happening in the Jewish world. So here we have, Felice, this is for you. So okay, this is the statement of the platform of the Reform movement. We affirm the reality and oneness of God, even as we may differ in our understanding of the divine presence. Okay, so this was the answer to your question. Remember, I think I emailed you, say, wait till tonight. So you'll see when you study the Torah portion this week in Torah study, and you read Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, the oneness, although some people translate it as alone, and that's a whole, I'm sure you'll talk about that with the Candor Saturday. Oneness, even as we may differ in our understanding of the divine presence, which means I believe in a supernatural being. Okay. I don't believe in a supernatural being. I believe that God is this motivation inside my soul that propels me to do something the right way. Okay, fine, good. But they're not the same thing. Yes, you're right. They're not the same thing. They're both and. Okay. So this is very important. All right. We affirm the Jewish people is bound to God by an eternal covenant. Okay. And our understanding of creation, revelation, and redemption. We'll meet that again somewhat on the high holidays. But the brit, the covenant, very, very powerful. Okay. We recognize our human responsibility, God's presence in moments of awe and wonder. We respond to God daily through private prayer. I'm teaching a course in the prayer book to a congregation. We did yesterday the whole walking through the Shabbat prayer book and the Shabbat prayers, the Nisim B'chol Yom, which is in every morning service, that celebrates with gratitude all the miracles of daily life. The fact that you got up this morning, the fact that you're alive, the fact that you can distinguish between night and day, the fact that you're a Jew. Okay? We trust in our tradition's promise that although God created us as finite beings, the spirit within us is eternal. In all these ways and more, God gives meaning and purpose to our lives. Torah. Torah is the foundation of Jewish life. We cherish the truths revealed in Torah, God's ongoing revelation to our people and the record of our people's ongoing relationship with God. Okay? But Felicia, you'll see it's not, we affirm that Torah is a divine act of divine revelation at a moment at Mount Sinai. Okay? Now, some of you may say, well, this is a very sort of like open-ended statement. It allows for lots of leeway. The answer to your question is absolutely yes. Because if you go back to last week, remember this concept of autonomy, which is both the blessing and the curse of the Reform movement. If we were doing, maybe we'll do a little bit of this next week about some of the bioethics stuff and end-of-life decision-making. This is where this comes right in conflict with a lot of stuff, okay? And Torah is a manifestation of God's love, and it's ongoing revelation. What does that mean? That means the Torah is constant. This is classic Judaism. The Torah is constantly being reevaluated, reinterpreted. So when you sit at Torah study, Shabbos morning, and you come up with an insight that you think, wow, I just realized that this is what this Torah can speak to me in my life right now. That's exactly what this is talking about. It's not fixed. So when the tradition created the oral law, the interpretations of the written law, that's exactly what this means. We're committed to the ongoing study of the whole array of mitzvot. That's why in the Eila Devarim prayer on Shabbos morning, you list all the things that you must do as a Jew, and the bottom line is Talmud Torah keneged kulam. The study of Torah leads to them all. We seek this is what this ongoing study. In other words, if you're not studying Torah, I hate to do a value judgment, but it's true. You're not fulfilling what it means to be a Reformed Jew. You have to study. You have to learn. You have to engage. Remember the blessing before Torah study, la asok. You have to engage the text. Engage that is exactly what this platform means. This is very demanding on people. We don't teach this enough to people. So people who say, well, I'm a Reformed Jew, I can do anything I want. No, Yahoo brain, you can't. I'm sorry, that's not the way it works. To be a Reformed Jew means all this stuff. We bring Torah to the world when we seek to sanctify the times and places of our lives through regular home and congregational observance, etc., etc., etc. We bring Torah in the world. So the social action, the social justice component of Reformed Judaism is basically we're bringing Torah into the world. Okay, high holidays, we'll talk about that in a month and a half. The festivals. We bring Torah into the world when we strive to fulfill the highest mandates of our relationship with others. This is, again, tikkun olam, repairing of the world. This is the social justice aspect, bring peace, freedom, justice. So if you're talking about the social justice component of what it means to be a Reformed Jew, it comes directly, this is standard, this has been from the beginning of the movement, okay? We affirm the mitzvah, setting aside portions of our earnings and our time to provide for those in need, especially never more important than now. The acts bring us closer to fulfilling the prophetic call to translate the words of Torah to the words of our hands. These are the prophetic prophets, Amos, Isaiah, Jeremiah. All these words and more Torah gives meaning and purpose for our lives. You'll notice, again, that this is a platform traditionally Jewish that says, get out into the world. Judaism demands you go out into the world. If you just sit, no, we are not an ascetic withdrawal religion. You got to bring Torah into the world. If not, you're not doing the right thing. Israel, this is a part of the platform that has undergone huge change from the beginning of the Reform movement. The Reform movement in this beginning, in many ways, was anti-Israel, anti-Zionist. And that's a whole, maybe another adult education class. Now, there's no rabbi, there's no Reform Jew that holds that position. Right now, the movement is also being split onto the nature of how we affiliate and affirm our Jewish identity vis-a-vis Israel. Because the political situation in Israel is in many ways splitting the American Jewish community. It's another adult education class for another time, maybe. We are Israel people aspiring to holiness, Israel a corporate. We're committed to the mitzvah Ahavat Israel, for the love of the Jewish people. All Israel is responsible for one another. This is the corporate. We embrace the religious and cultural pluralism, expression of the vitality of Israel and the diaspora. In other words, we do things a certain way in Des Moines. They may not do it in Haifa. That's okay. There's a diversity and a pluralism. We're an inclusive committee, opening the doors to people of all of our sexual orientation, Gerim, people who've chosen to convert you. This was not in the previous three platforms. So you see, this represents, again, the movement of Judaism in the last 30, 40 years to open the doors, spread out, be much more inclusive, et cetera, et cetera. So this is part of who we are now. We believe that we'll open doors for the ready, but also actively encourage those who are seeking a spiritual home to find it in Judaism. Next week, I think we will talk a little bit about the conversion issue and the patrilineal and matrilineal descent, because this basically says everybody who wants to walk into one of our congregations is welcome. and we're going to provide that. We're going to try to, one of the things I want to try and do, I've already talked to Rabbi Raskin and Rabbi Goodman about really consolidating the conversion program for the congregation, which won't probably happen until after the holidays. Now, here we go. We're committed to Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel, and rejoice in its accomplishments. We affirm the unique qualities of living in Israel and encourage Aliyah immigration to Israel. That's a big step for the Reform movement, encouraging you to pack up and move to Israel. It doesn't say you have to, but it encourages it. This is honored in the breach. The majority of Reform Jews and conservative Jews, Reconstructionist Jews, renewal Jews, humanistic Jews, etc., are not making Aliyah, are not. But this was a part of the platform of discussion, but we want to make sure that we encourage it. This is something that's part of who we are. We're committed to look at this. We are committed to a vision of the state of Israel that promotes full civil, human, and religious rights for all of its inhabitants, and that strives for a lasting peace between Israel and its neighbors. This was written in 1999. You can see the challenges that we face in 2020 vis-a-vis what's going on there and the threatened annexation, which will really drive a wedge into a lot of this. We affirm that both Israel and the diaspora Jews should remain vibrant and independent communities. And we urge the Jews who reside outside Israel to learn Hebrew, etc. We're committed to furthering progressive Judaism to the world. In all these ways, Israel gives meaning and purpose to our lives. In other words, the Reform Rabbinate in 1999, the last platform, understood that there's this bifurcation, but we are very comfortable in affirming the diaspora community, life in America, and affirming the Jewish life in America and to strengthen that Jewish life in America. That's part of that paragraph. And then the bracha, etc., to end that. So this is that. What I wanted to show you here is this is the last major statement of belief by the Reform Rabbinate that we have voted on in 1999. I do not know of any plans to write a fourth or fifth platform, but there will be one coming up given all the changes. When, we don't know. And then this was voted on in convention by the, because I was at this convention in Pittsburgh, hundreds and hundreds, 500, 600, 700 Reform rabbis from all over North America and literally the world. So, can you get a copy? So questions, Oren, why do they encourage, what do they do to encourage Aliyah and do to make the transition easier for those who choose to make it? Oren, I hope you're still there. There's been a lessening in this, to be quite honest with you.
What was the title of the document?
The title of the document, a statement of principles for Reform Judaism, a statement of principles for Reform Judaism, adopted in Pittsburgh, 1999. I can hopefully send this to Gene and he can get it out to you.
That'll be fine.
Okay. Probably not tonight though, so don't get angry at me because it's been a long Zoom day.
Is there anybody else that has we only have a moment or two left, but is there anybody else that has a question, or if you like, you can send me your questions by email and I will relay them to the rabbi, and I'm sure that he'll be happy to respond to them.
Let me just answer. We have 2 minutes. Okay. Let me just do this. So, or wherever Oren is, we are not really encouraging a lot of Aliyah. It's very, very personal. The ARTSA, which is the Association of Reform Zionists of America, is trying to do that. I forgot to put that on their vocabulary list. Last one, Susan, if a congregation outwardly rejects CCR's statement, let's say, for example, they refuse to perform LGBTQ weddings, can or does that congregation lose URJ affiliation? The answer to that is no. Go back to this is very, very important because not every rabbi will, in their own personal theology, I'm comfortable doing same-sex marriages or interfaith marriages. I've done interfaith marriages according to the CCAR guidelines, which we'll talk about next week, since I was ordained. And I've done same-sex marriages a couple of times as well, that I've been asked to do them, especially when it became legal in the state of New Jersey about 8 or 9 years ago. But if a rabbi sits down and says, in my personal theology, I am not comfortable doing this, that's their person. This is rabbinic autonomy. And this is why the concept, we have no chief rabbi. The URJ has no punishment modality. We have congregations who in many cases refuse to, they went their own way. The rabbis said, I'm not going to follow this. We had rabbis who said, after patrilineal descent was passed, said, I'm not comfortable. I will not, in my congregation, we will not do this. The URJ had no ability to expel them from the movement. This is why congregational autonomy and rabbinic autonomy are prized values within the movement. How a congregation gets expelled from the union is if there's an ethics violation, or they just say, we're not going to pay the membership dues anymore, and we just don't want to be a member of the union, they can leave the union. It impacts the rabbi because of pension. It impacts the kids and their ability to get into camp. But as I used to tell congregations who used to, do I don't want to pay the month, go, no one's stopping you. No, but when something happens and you call, I have no responsibility to you. So, and your rabbi will lose his pension, or her pension stops. So you're hurting that person, which may mean that person may leave, because that's a real economic impact. And the only way a rabbi gets expelled, you don't defrock rabbis. If there's an ethics violation, I sat on the ethics committee for 5 years for the CCAR, and thankfully I don't have to do that anymore, or I am mentoring somebody. And they have very strict guidelines, rabbinic codes of ethics. And we don't have the time to go into how that works. We can certainly raise that next week, and I'd be more than happy to share it with you. But that's how a colleague who would be suspended from performing any rabbinic duties or expelled from the CCAR, which is a radical move. And that's usually for a violation of the ethics code. And the ethics code is that's for real serious violations of just basic derech eretz. David, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so over the last couple of years, at least that I've been aware, the alphabet soup of groups that you outlined, HUC, CCAR, URJ, have put forward different statements and positions on various issues that have conflicted with our temple's leadership's views on particular issues, and have tended at times to put us in an awkward position because we don't accept the view of the group that put it forward. And yet, as members of those organizations, it looks as if we would endorse those views. So when they do that, unfortunately, there's typically no outreach to temple presidents or executive directors or others that I'm aware of.
Oh yeah, there are.
Well, I've not ever been called or asked in any form or fashion. I don't know if our previous presidents have. So I'm wondering how do we fix that, other than having to go to a biennial, for example?
No. It's very simple. And this works, by the way, because not every congregation agrees with every resolution that's passed by the CCAR or the URJ. And usually when it involves presidents of congregations, it's more along the lines of URJ, because CCAR stuff is much more rabbinic. And not, as I said, not every rabbi agrees with all the resolutions of CCAR, as we'll talk about next week. But the easiest thing to do in my experience, and this has always worked, usually the lay leadership or the president of the congregation will have a conversation with the rabbi, usually at an executive board meeting or board meeting. And if you don't have a president's council when we had regions, we had this I used to meet with my presidents regularly to do exactly what you're talking about. Once they killed off the regions, a lot of that stuff disappeared. So now it's much more involved that you'd have to sit down, for example, next year. Let's just say next year. Or let's say you came to me next week and said, Address, the union just passed a resolution and we think we have a problem. Who can I talk to? I said, okay, here's 3 people you can call. Here's 3 people. And here's a bunch of other people you can call and get a response. But there was at one time a much more organized way for presidents to talk to each other. But there still are listservs where you can talk to presidents and get that explanation or work out and find out how some of these other congregations, let's say, who may disagree with a particular point of view.
The problem is that the statements are made and then we're forced to react.
Well, again,
before they come out.
All the more reason to get people involved in all these various subcommittees and committees, because that's where the policy really germinates from. So, for example, once we reconstitute the Social Action Committee, I'm going to want to hope that a couple of these people get on the Commission on Social Action, so that when something comes to the RAC or the Commission on Social, ha-Chesed's voice will be heard. But again, it's still a majority rule. But again, under the concept of rabbinic autonomy, congregational autonomy, there's no adjudicatory power coming out of New York saying, well, you have to agree with all this, because a lot of congregations, especially when it becomes very, very, very controversial, like a lot of times with the Israel stuff, sometimes with the conversion stuff. If they annex the West Bank, there's going to be a whole brouhaha about that. Certainly, as we've had the conversation about some of the social justice stuff that's coming out now, but there's ways of getting your voice heard. And the bottom line is, in your previous incarnations, that system was never probably explained to the leadership of the congregation. But I will tell you that if there's a question that comes up now, all you have to do is call me. I can connect you with the appropriate people in about a minute. Because I know most of these people and have worked with them, which is, so there are ways, and but that is why going to the biennial and going to the conventions and going to the regional meetings, if they still have them, is very, very important, because that's how your voice is heard. That's the way it works. It is extremely, in that sense, democratic. Where's Gene?
I'm right here. I'm
okay.
Under Janie. I'm under Gene and Janie now. My computer died.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. We held a service for it during your presentation, but we tried not to be noisy.
Any other, if there's no other questions, I know this is a little dry, but if we're going to teach you about the movement, you got to know the vocabulary and how things are done. So next week, we're going to talk a little bit about, again, reinforce the governance stuff, and actually take you through a couple of key responsa that will actually show you how a decision is made, and how and on a maybe 1 or 2 particular issues that were controversial. I think we'll do something around the patrilineal thing, which drove the conservative movement and the Orthodox movement crazy, still does. And a couple, maybe, well, anyway, we'll see. And if you want to have something addressed, in other words, I really would like to know how the reform movement's position is on this issue, email it to me, but don't wait until Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock. Get it to me by Tuesday, so I have time, because I'm teaching every day and every night next week. So it's a very busy time. Stay safe. Good luck with the hurricane, because the weather here says you're getting a hurricane. And who knows? Just stay safe, everybody. Stay healthy. Thank you for joining. I appreciate your time and your questions. I'll see you on campus.
Thank you, Rabbi. Everybody can unmute themselves. I'll keep the site up for a few minutes and have a good
stick around for a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Is Sydney still on?
Who?
Sydney.
I didn't see Sydney tonight.
She
No.
spoke earlier, the head of Adult Ed. She introduced Adult
She
Ed.
did this, but I think she went to have a drink or something. It's not necessarily a bad idea, by the way. All I have is iced tea, but anyway. Oh, Tapper was
Well,
on.
a Long Island iced tea and a Southern iced tea are a little different.
Yeah, well, I can't. I've had Long Island iced teas. I get to about 3/4 of the way. I'm a very bad drinker because if I have a drink and then I start to giggle, and if I have a second drink, I'm very. My kids think it's hysterical. My kids think it's hysterical, and they know if I have 2 drinks, they'll get entertained for about 20 minutes.
Excuse me, Rabbi, what is your email?
You can email me at the synagogue, and it's I think it's rabbi at whatever the temple.
Temple.org.
Yeah.
Which one? Can you repeat
It's
it?
rabbi at thetemplejack.org.
Okay.
Yeah, that automatically gets funneled to my computer here at home. And but if you have a question or something you want to raise, that like Felice did last week, that worked out fine. 2 participants with raised hands. Oh, wait a minute. I have David. Where's David? David Selling?
On the phone.
He's on the phone. He was on the phone.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess his hand is not raised.
And he's muted.
Oh, he's muted.
Yeah, he's on the phone and he's muted. So
Well, strike 2.
do that.
It's an oxymoron.
It's email.
David,
Okay,
I don't know. David, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Is that David?
Yes.
Yes, it's David.
Rabbi, are you talking about David Kaufman or David Sellen?
David Selling.
Yes, he's the one that just answered you.
He's the one on the phone.
He's the phone.
Okay, is he still on the phone? Can he
Yes, I am.
Oh,
That's him.
David Selling, you have a question?
For Gene.
For me.
Oh, for Gene,
Yes,
thank
David.
God. Thank God. Okay, good.
Well, I'll save my question for you some other time.
Well,
Rabbi Adris.
yeah, all right. I saw that movie.
But this was a fabulous session.
Oh, I love you.
It really
Take
was.
very good. You get a check.
And it was very clarified. You clarified a lot of things.
Good. Well, good. I'm good.
David, do you want to ask the question now, or do you want to write down my phone number and give me a call?
Well, this is a quick question. You can answer yes or no. I have your phone number, but I want to ask you this question. For tomorrow night's Erev Shabbat service, are we using what you did for last week, the getting on, or are we going back to what we had, or is there a brand new getting on?
I'll tell you what, David, I'll make sure that it's tomorrow to make sure that everybody has it.
Okay.
Because quite frankly, I don't know what you have on, from last week. So I want to make sure you get the right one. So we'll send out the right connection. Okay.
Yeah, well, you told me last week's, but it's not. Last week's was not what we've done for the past 10 weeks. So, and Rabbi Barry couldn't answer that question on Saturday because she didn't know what you did. Okay.
I'll make sure that it's sent out tomorrow. Okay.
Thank you.
You're
That's
welcome.
it.
Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Drive safe.
Thanks. We're gonna leave now.
All right, boys and girls, no further questions, and I'm gonna go find out if my grandson's team won their baseball game tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Stay healthy. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Night.